Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty cool story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. So get cozy, enjoy it, and watch it till the end, guys.
There are names in the grim darkness of the far future that carry weight beyond mere sound and syllable. Names that echo through 10,000 years of unending war, whispered in fear by those who still cling to hope, and roared in exultation by those who have embraced damnation. Among these names, few carry the bitter taste of betrayal, quite like Kharn. Not Kharn the loyal, not Kharn the righteous, but Kharn the betrayer, a title earned not through treachery against the emperor, but through an act so savage, so utterly unthinkable, that it would forever shatter one of the most feared Space Marine legions into countless fragments, never to be whole again. This is not a tale of glory. It is not a story of heroism or noble sacrifice. It is the account of how a single warrior, driven beyond the edges of sanity by neural implants that turned pain into ecstasy and rage into purpose, would take up a flamer on a frozen demon world and turn it against his own brothers. It is the chronicle of the Night of Madness on Scalathrax, when the World Eater's Legion ceased to exist as a unified force, consumed by the very bloodlust that had been their greatest weapon. But to understand how we arrived at that terrible night, we must first journey back to a time before the heresy, before the betrayal, to understand the man who would become the avatar of Khorne's endless wrath. The story of Kharn's ultimate betrayal begins not on Scalathrax, but in the halls of a legion that once bore a different name, in the mind of a warrior who still possessed something resembling reason, and in the shadow of a Primarch whose suffering would doom them all. It is a tale that spans the breadth of the Horus heresy, from the blood-soaked sands of Nuceria to the burning walls of Terra itself, and finally to a world where even the night could kill. It is a story written in the corpses of brothers, painted in the flames of madness, and sealed with an act that would earn Kharn a title he would carry for 10 millennia. Let us begin where all tragedies begin, with hope, with brotherhood, and with the seeds of destruction already taking root. The World Eaters. Before the fall, sons of war. Before they were the World Eaters, they were the Warhounds, and they were already known for their ferocity. Born from the gene seed laboratories of Terra during the earliest days of the Great Crusade, the 12th Legion carved their reputation not through subtlety or tactical brilliance, but through raw, unrelenting aggression. Where other legions might siege a fortress over weeks, the Warhounds would storm it in hours, accepting casualties that would horrify their more cautious brothers. Where others would negotiate or intimidate, the Warhounds would simply attack. They were the Emperor's attack dogs, and they reveled in the role. Among their ranks rose a warrior named Kharn, a Terran-born Astartes, who would eventually achieve the rank of captain of the 8th Assault Company. In those early days, before the coming of their Primarch, Kharn was known not for mindless rage, but for tactical acumen combined with ferocious close combat skill. He trained under the Legion's master of neophytes, Gruna, on the distant world of Bot, learning the arts of war that would serve him throughout the Great Crusade. Unlike many of his brothers who were already showing signs of uncontrolled aggression, Kharn possessed a quality that would make him invaluable in the years to come. He could channel his fury, direct it, even suppress it when necessary. This made him stand out, and it would eventually catch the attention of the most important figure in the Legion's history. The discovery of Angron on Nuceria should have been a moment of triumph for the Warhounds. Every Space Marine Legion yearned for the day when they would be reunited with their genetic father, the Primarch from whose DNA they had been created. The Warhounds were no different. They imagined a warrior king who would lead them to even greater victories, who would understand their nature and perfect their methods. What they found instead was a broken gladiator, a being so damaged by torture and augmentation that he could barely function as anything other than a weapon. The joy of discovery turned to horror as their father rejected them, disavowed them, and showed them nothing but contempt. Angron had been a slave on Nuceria, forced to fight in gladiatorial pits for the entertainment of the planet's corrupt nobility. To make their slaves more entertaining, the Nucerians had developed a form of neural surgery called the butcher's nails. These archaeotech implants, crude but devastatingly effective, were hammered into the brains of gladiators, destroying the parts of the mind that regulated emotion and sensation. The nails amplified aggression to superhuman levels while simultaneously inflicting constant, agonizing pain that could only be relieved through violence. The more you killed, the more pleasure flooded your brain. Stand still, and the pain would drive you mad. It was a perfect system for creating mindless killers for the arena. For a Primarch, a being whose very biology was designed by the Emperor of mankind himself to be the pinnacle of human achievement, the nails were a catastrophe, where they simply drove normal humans into berserker frenzies. In Angron, they fought against his Primarch physiology. His body constantly attempted to heal the damage, causing the nails to dig deeper, creating a vicious cycle of degradation. The limbic lobe and insular cortex had been destroyed, the parts of the brain responsible for emotional regulation and higher thought. What remained was anger, pain, and an all-consuming need for violence. The Emperor himself examined Angron and concluded that removing the nails would kill him. They had become too integrated, too deeply embedded. The Primarch was dying by inches, and nothing could stop it. This broken demigod was forcibly teleported aboard the Warhound's battle barge after he led his fellow gladiators in a doomed slave revolt. The Emperor had arrived too late to save Angron's army of freed slaves, choosing instead to simply claim his son and depart. Angron never forgave this act. He had wanted to die with his brothers and sisters in the arena, to fall in glorious battle rather than live with the shame of abandonment. The Emperor denied him this death, and in doing so, ensured that Angron would forever hate the Imperium he was supposed to serve. The Warhounds found their Primarch imprisoned in a cargo hold, killing every officer who tried to speak with him, lost in an endless cycle of rage and anguish. It was Kharn who would eventually reach through that rage. After Angron fled the Legion for 2 years, living as a savage on a feral world seeking someone strong enough to end his misery, Kharn tracked him down. He did not approach with reverence or fear, but with blunt honesty. He reminded Angron of his fallen gladiator comrades, and how they would despise seeing him in such a wretched state. He challenged the Primarch to lead, to make meaning from his suffering, rather than simply seeking oblivion. Somehow, impossibly, this argument succeeded where all others had failed. Angron agreed to return to his legion, not out of duty or love, but because Kharn had given him a purpose. He would make his sons into what he had been made. He would gift them the nails. The legion's apothecaries, led by Garland Surlak, were ordered to replicate the butcher's nails and implant them into the Space Marines. The early attempts were disastrous. Marine after Marine died on the operating table, their enhanced biology unable to accommodate the crude neural surgery. Angron showed nothing but disgust for these failures, calling his sons weak for being unable to endure what he endured daily. The attempts continued, driven by the Primarch's demands and the Legion's desperate desire to earn their father's approval. If sharing his agony was the price of his acceptance, then they would pay it gladly. Kharn became the first World Eater to survive the implantation of the butcher's nails. The surgery was a success by the crude metrics of the apothecarian, which meant that he lived and retained enough cognitive function to fight. But something fundamental had changed. The Kharn who had been capable of reason and self-control now found those qualities increasingly difficult to access. The nails sang constantly in his skull, a chorus of pain that could only be silenced through violence. The pleasure that came with killing became addictive, a drug more potent than any chemical compound. Stand still too long, and the agony would overwhelm even his superhuman pain tolerance. Move, fight, kill, and for brief, glorious moments, there was relief. There was even something approaching joy. Following Kharn's successful surgery, over 1,000 World Eaters were quickly implanted with the nails. With these enhanced warriors, Angron led a counterattack against the Genons, who had been causing problems for the Legion. The World Eaters tore through their enemies with a savagery that shocked even their Primarch. They didn't just defeat the Genons, they annihilated them, slaughtering everything in their path with such ferocity that the campaign ended in hours rather than weeks. The nails had proven their worth in blood and screaming metal. Soon, nearly every World Eater would undergo the surgery, and the transformation of the Legion would be complete. The Warhounds became the World Eaters, and the nickname that had once been an insult became their official title. They were no longer merely aggressive. They had become something else entirely. They were living weapons, beings who existed only to kill, whose every moment of consciousness was defined by pain or the relief from pain that came through violence. They threw away their bolters, finding ranged combat too distant, too slow to properly satisfy the nails' demands. Instead, they armed themselves with chain axes and power fists, weapons that required them to be in the thick of the slaughter, close enough to feel the heat of spilled blood and hear the last gasps of their enemies. They became specialists in assault, in the brutal, grinding close combat that other legions sought to avoid. And they were terrifyingly effective. The transformation was not merely physical or tactical, it was psychological, spiritual even. A World Eater, before the nails, might have taken pride in a particularly clever flanking maneuver or a well-coordinated assault. A World Eater, after the nails, took pride only in the number of enemies killed, in the sensation of a chain axe biting through armor and flesh, in the brief moments of peace that came after particularly intense violence. The nails rewired their brains completely, making combat the only source of positive sensation they could experience. Everything else faded to grey static, meaningless noise between the moments that mattered. This had profound effects on the Legion's culture. The elaborate rituals and traditions that other legions maintained, the ceremonies and honors and ranks, all of it became hollow to the World Eaters. What did ceremony matter when you could be killing something instead? What did rank matter when the only true measure of worth was how many skulls you had claimed? The World Eaters simplified everything down to violence and the hierarchy of violence. The strongest killed the most. The most successful earned the right to lead through demonstrated carnage. Everything else was weakness to be discarded. Angron watched this transformation with something approaching satisfaction. His sons were finally becoming worthy of him, finally sharing in the existence he had endured for decades. They understood now what it meant to live with the nails, to have every moment be either agony or the fleeting relief from agony. They could no longer judge him for his rages or his brutality because they experienced those same impulses themselves. The gulf between father and sons, which had been vast when they first met, was finally closing. They were becoming what he was, what the High Riders of Nuceria had made him, weapons that thought barely, killers that served reluctantly, monsters that had once been men. Kharn rose through these ranks to become not just a company captain, but Angron's equerry, his right hand, and the only World Eater who could consistently reach through the Primarch's rage to deliver counsel. It was an impossible position. The nails constantly pushed Kharn toward mindless violence, yet his duties required him to retain enough clarity to lead, to make decisions, to communicate with commanders from other legions. He existed in a constant state of tension, balancing on a knife's edge between the warrior he had been and the monster the nails were making him become. For a time, incredibly, he maintained that balance. He formed friendships with warriors from other legions. He sparred with Sigismund of the Imperial Fists, developing a bond of mutual respect that would make their future confrontation all the more tragic. He joked and competed and even showed something resembling compassion. But the nails were always there, always digging deeper, always singing their song of violence. And Kharn was listening. The descent into darkness, the Shadow Crusade. The Horus heresy did not begin suddenly. Like all great betrayals, it was built on foundations of resentment, manipulation, and carefully nurtured grievances. For the World Eaters, the turn to chaos was almost inevitable. They already worshipped violence above all else. The step from serving the Emperor's martial vision to serving Kharn's endless bloodlust was a small one. When Horus revealed his rebellion, Angron barely hesitated. The Emperor had denied him his death, had stolen from him the only family he had ever chosen, had forced him into a life of service he never wanted. Why should he remain loyal? The World Eaters followed their Primarch into damnation, and most of them did so willingly. The Imperium had given them nothing but war. Kharn would give them war eternal. The massacre at Istvan III, where loyalist members of the traitor legions were purged, saw Kharn supposedly killed in combat against Gaviel Loken of the Lunar Wolves. Thrown against the dozer blades of a vehicle, his chest impaled and his body broken, Kharn was left for dead in the burning ruins of the betrayed world. But the World Eaters were becoming something more than human, and Kharn was transforming into something more than merely a World Eater. He was becoming Kharn's champion. He was recovered by his brothers, and somehow, impossibly, survived his horrific injuries. It was an early sign of the Dark Patron who was beginning to take notice of this particular warrior. During the Shadow Crusade, the joint operation between the World Eaters and Wordbearers to ravage the realm of Ultramar, Kharn formed an unlikely friendship with Argel Tal, a Wordbearer captain. Tal possessed an ability that few others had. He could calm Kharn, could reach through the constant screaming of the nails to the man who still existed somewhere beneath. This friendship worried Erebus, the Wordbearer, first chaplain and architect of much of the heresy's design. He had seen Kharn's destiny. He knew that this World Eater was meant to earn the title Betrayer, to commit an act so destructive that it would reshape his entire legion. Erebus could not allow a Wordbearer to derail that fate. The Shadow Crusade itself was a campaign of unprecedented brutality, even by the standards of the Horus heresy. The World Eaters and Wordbearers descended upon the 500 worlds of Ultramar like a plague, attacking world after world with the specific goal of drawing out Robut Guilliman and his legion. Each world they struck was not merely conquered, but destroyed, its population slaughtered to the last child, its cities burned to ash, its very existence erased from imperial records. The Wordbearers performed dark rituals over the corpses, using the deaths to fuel their sorceries and weaken the barriers between real space and the warp. The World Eaters simply killed, piling skulls into mountains and soaking the ground with so much blood that it formed rivers. Kharn led many of these assaults personally, his reputation growing with each world he helped destroy. On Armatura, the Ultramarines' armory world, he was at the forefront of the assault that breached the fortress monastery's outer defenses. The fighting there lasted for weeks. World Eaters and Ultramarines locked in brutal combat through corridors that had been built to withstand siege warfare. Kharn killed dozens of Ultramarines personally, each one a warrior of legendary skill and discipline. But the Nails cared nothing for the quality of the opponent, only the quantity. Each kill brought the same relief, the same fleeting pleasure, whether the victim was a veteran sergeant or a newly initiated battle brother. It was during the assault on Nuceria, of all places, that Kharn found a kind of brotherhood with Argel Tal. The Wordbearer captain was himself undergoing a transformation, possessed by a demon that was slowly fusing with his body and soul. But unlike the World Eaters, who had lost their humanity to augmentation, Argel Tal was consciously choosing his path, accepting demonic possession as the price for power. The two warriors found common ground in their transformations, recognizing each other as beings caught between what they had been and what they were becoming. They fought side by side on Nuceria's blood-soaked sands, and in the brief moments between battles, they talked about what was happening to them, to their legions, to the galaxy itself. Argel Tal was one of the few beings who could speak to Kharn as a person, rather than as a weapon. He would ask questions about what the nails felt like, how Kharn maintained any sense of self when his brain was constantly being overridden by pain and aggression. And Kharn, in those rare moments of clarity, would try to explain the inexplicable, the sensation of being a passenger in his own body, watching himself do terrible things while some part of him screamed in protest, but could do nothing to stop it. Argel Tal understood, or seemed to. He was facing his own version of the same struggle, trying to retain some element of identity while being merged with a being that had never been human at all. So Erebus arranged for Argel Tal to die, manipulating events to ensure that the World Eater's friend would fall in battle. When Kharn learned of this, he nearly killed Erebus on the spot. His fury was apocalyptic, the rage of a man who had lost one of the last threads connecting him to anything resembling humanity. Only the intervention of other word-bearers saved Erebus's life, and even then, Kharn swore that one day he would claim the chaplain's skull. It was a wound that never healed, another piece of Kharn's humanity carved away by the cruelties of war and betrayal. With Argel Tal's death, one of the last restraints on Kharn's descent was removed. The Shadow Crusade culminated on Nuceria, Angron's homeworld. Here, in the very place where he had suffered as a slave, where he had been mutilated and broken, Angron would undergo his final transformation. The World Eaters, now fully in the grip of their bloodlust, slaughtered their way across the planet. They were no longer fighting for strategic objectives or tactical advantage. They killed because the nails demanded it, because Khorne's hunger was becoming their hunger, because the line between warrior and berserker had been erased so completely that they could no longer remember it had ever existed. And as they killed, as the blood flowed in rivers and the skulls mounted in piles, Khorne reached down and claimed his most favored son. Angron's transformation into a demon prince was agony made manifest. His physical form tore itself apart and rebuilt, reshaped by warp energies into something that was no longer remotely human. The Primarch who had been broken by the nails found them consumed by his new demonic nature, integrated into his being as part of his ascension. He became a towering figure of brass and blood, wreathed in flame and fury, a creature of pure violence given immortal form. The World Eaters who witnessed this transformation felt something between horror and exaltation. Their father had become a god, or close enough to one. And if this was their destiny, if this was where the path of bloodshed led, then they would walk it gladly. Kharn was the first person Angron spoke to after his transformation. The newly ascended demon prince looked down at his equerry and gave him a simple command. Go to the lower decks of the Conqueror, their flagship, and massacre the slaves. Build a throne from their skulls. It was a test, a command, and a revelation all at once. This was what they had become. This was what they would always be. Kharn did not hesitate. He went below decks and killed every slave he could find, stacking their corpses into a grotesque throne for his demonic father. The man who had once been capable of friendship and loyalty now existed only to feed the blood god's endless appetite. After Nuceria, the World Eaters descended into total madness. They no longer fought coherent campaigns. They simply attacked anything they encountered, butchering entire populations for no strategic purpose beyond the satisfaction of the nails and the glory of Khorne. Worlds were left as nothing but charnel houses, their populations converted into skull pyramids and blood altars. The World Eaters would land on a planet, kill everything that moved, and then depart in search of fresh victims. They had become a plague of violence, a cancer spreading through the galaxy, and they no longer remembered or cared about anything beyond the next kill. This posed a problem for Horus. The War Master needed his legions to actually follow orders, to advance on strategic objectives, to be weapons he could direct rather than rabid animals he could only release. The World Eaters were becoming useless to him, too far gone to participate in coordinated operations. He summoned them to Ullanor to muster for the assault on Terra, but Angron ignored the command. The World Eaters continued their rampage across the galaxy, following their Primarch's lead as he pursued his own vendetta against any world he deemed worthy of destruction. Only when Perturabo himself led the Iron Warriors to track down the World Eaters and force them to comply did they finally join the gathering at Ullanor.
You know, researching this story really struck with me at how tragic Kharn's fall truly is. Here was a warrior who started with honor, who built friendships across legions, who tried to reach his broken father when no one else could. And through no choice of his own, through a surgical augmentation he couldn't refuse, he was transformed into the monster we know today. It makes me wonder how many other World Eaters might have been heroes in a different timeline. If the Nails had never existed, sometimes the most horrifying villains in Warhammer aren't the ones who choose evil, but the ones who had evil forced upon them. Anyway, let's continue with the story.
By the time the World Eaters reached Terra, they were barely controllable. Kharn found himself struggling against the urge to kill everything around him, even valued allies like Lotara Sarin, the mortal captain of the Conqueror, who had earned the respect of the entire legion through her competence and courage. The Nails no longer allowed for distinctions between friend and foe. Everything was a potential victim. Everything was prey. When Horus announced that the Death Guard, not the World Eaters, would have the honor of being first to assault Terra, Angron fell into such a rage that he massacred everyone he encountered in the bowels of the Conqueror. Kharn had to intervene, teleporting the frenzied demon prince to a labyrinth prepared for containing dangerous prisoners, just to prevent him from destroying their own ship. The World Eaters who arrived at Terra were not soldiers. They were natural disasters in power armor, barely restrained catastrophes waiting to be unleashed. And when the siege began, when the order finally came to attack the Emperor's palace, they were released upon the defenders like a tidal wave of chain axes and bloodlust. Kharn would be at the forefront of every assault, claiming skulls by the thousands, writing his name in blood across the walls of mankind's greatest fortress. But he would also find himself facing an old friend, a warrior he had once sparred with in the training cages, a man who represented everything the Imperium was becoming in response to the heresy's horrors. The siege of Terra would be Kharn's finest hour and his darkest moment. It would be where he came closest to death, where he claimed more skulls than any other World Eater, and where the seeds of his ultimate betrayal would be planted. The man who entered the siege as Angron's equerry would leave it as something else entirely, a walking corpse sustained only by Horn's will, a champion of the blood god whose humanity had been burned away in the fires of battle. To understand what happened on Scalathrax, we must first witness what happened at Terra, where Kharn became the perfect weapon, and in doing so, lost whatever remained of the warrior he had once been. The Siege of Terra. Blood on the palace walls. The Siege of Terra was not merely a battle. It was the culmination of years of civil war, the final confrontation between the Emperor's vision of mankind's future and Horus's corrupted dream of galactic domination. Every traitor legion that could reach Terra joined the assault. The forces of chaos marshaled their full strength, bringing demons, dark Mechanicum war engines, and corrupted Imperial army regiments to bear against the Emperor's palace. Against them stood the defenders, outnumbered but fighting on their home ground, led by primarchs like Rogel Dawn, Sanguinius, and Jagatai Khan. The fate of humanity would be decided here, in the ruins of Terra's greatest fortifications, measured in the corpses of demigods and the broken dreams of empire. For the World Eaters, the siege was everything they had been created for. This was not some backwater compliance action or suppression of Xenos raiders. This was total war against the finest warriors the Imperium could field, conducted on ground soaked in symbolism and significance. Every defender was a worthy skull for Kharn. Every meter of ground taken brought them closer to the throne room and the ultimate prize, the Emperor himself. The nails sang in every World Eater's skull, driving them forward with irresistible compulsion. They would take the palace or die trying, and most of them welcomed both possibilities equally. Kharn led from the front, as he always had. When the initial assaults began against the outer walls and spaceports, he was among the first to engage the enemy. The Lion's Gate. Spaceport, a massive structure extending into Terra's upper atmosphere, became the site of some of the fiercest fighting in the early siege. The traitors needed the spaceport to land their Titans and heavy equipment. The defenders knew this and had fortified it with over 18,000 Imperial fists and 800,000 Imperial army troops under the command of Fafnir Ran. Breaking through these defenses would cost an ocean of blood. The World Eaters welcomed the challenge. Warsmith Kroger of the Iron Warriors led the assault, bringing massive artillery and siege engines to bear against the spaceport's defenses. But the real momentum came from the World Eaters, from warriors like Kharn, who cared nothing for cover or suppressing fire, who simply charged forward into the teeth of the defensive positions with their chain axes screaming. The Imperial fists fought with disciplined fury, their bolters reaping a terrible toll among the attackers. For hours, the assault ground forward meter by meter, each position bought with dozens of lives. The World Eaters took casualties that would have caused any other legion to retreat, but the Nails would not allow retreat. They could only advance, even into certain death. The appearance of Angron changed everything. The Daemon Primarch manifested amidst the World Eaters, a towering figure of brass and fury that radiated such malevolence that mortals went mad simply from witnessing him. He waded into the Loyalist lines and destroyed a Capital Imperialis and Leviathan super-heavy vehicle with his bare hands, tearing through armor plating that could resist Titan weapons. The Loyalists recoiled in horror, but their terror was premature. The Emperor's psychic shield, an invisible barrier of force that protected the innermost areas of the palace, rejected Angron's demonic presence. He was forced back, banished from the material realm by the sheer power of the Emperor's will. But his brief appearance had served its purpose. The World Eaters knew their father was with them, and they redoubled their assault with even greater fury. The truth of the initial assault was that it was a feint, a distraction, allowing Iron Warriors infiltrators to penetrate the spaceport's inner defenses through secret routes. While the World Eaters battered themselves against the outer walls, Foryx led 1,000 Iron Warriors through maintenance tunnels and access corridors to seize the bridges connecting the spaceport to the palace proper. It was during this renewed assault that Kharn would encounter an old friend turned enemy, a warrior whose path had taken him to becoming the very embodiment of the Imperium's new identity. Sigismund, first captain of the Imperial Fists and formerly Kharn's sparring partner and oath brother, had been transformed by the heresy just as thoroughly as Kharn had been transformed by the Nails. But where Kharn had lost his humanity to bloodlust, Sigismund had lost his to faith. He had become the Emperor's champion, armed with the black sword and sworn to defend Terra until his last breath. Where once there had been a warrior who joked and competed in friendly duels, now there was a zealot, cold and implacable, who killed with mechanical precision and showed no emotion. He had cut down hundreds of traitor champions already, earning the nickname the Black Knight among both loyalist and traitor forces. When Kharn and Sigismund met on the walls of the Lion's Gate spaceport, both warriors recognized what the other had become. They were mirrors of each other, the final products of different forms of transformation. They had both lost something essential, had both been reduced to living weapons. But where Kharn raged against this reduction, even as the Nails forced him to embrace it, Sigismund had accepted it with cold serenity. They did not speak beyond the basic acknowledgement of who they faced. There was nothing left to say. The duel began without ceremony. Kharn attacked with the fury of the Nails, his movements a blur of violence as Gorachild, the recovered chain axe of Angron himself, carved through the air towards Sigismund's head. The Imperial fist parried with the black sword, and for a moment They were locked together, testing each other's strength. Sigismund was the superior technical duelist. His form was perfect. Every movement economical and precise. Against any other opponent, the duel would have ended quickly. But Kharn was not fighting with technique alone. The power of Kharn was flowing through him, amplifying his strength and speed to superhuman levels, even by the standards of the Astartes. He was stronger than Sigismund, faster, driven by a force that transcended mere physical prowess. Sigismund found himself pressed back, his perfect technique barely able to keep pace with Kharn's assault. The World Eater laughed as he fought, a sound without joy, driven by the pleasure centers of his brain being flooded with endorphins as the nails rewarded him for violence. He tried to provoke a reaction from Sigismund, hurling taunts and insults, trying to find some trace of the warrior he had once known. But Sigismund remained silent, his face showing no expression, his movements betraying no emotion. He fought like a machine, and this disturbed Kharn more than any counterattack could have. The duel turned when Kharn's strength finally began to overwhelm Sigismund's defense. A particularly savage blow from Gorechild crashed through the Imperial fist's guard, the chain axe's teeth screaming as they bit into ceramite. Sigismund stumbled, off balance, and Kharn saw his opening. He raised Gorechild for the killing blow, ready to claim the skull of his old friend for Kharn. But before he could strike, something hit him with the force of a thunderbolt. He was sent flying across the spaceport, crashing through debris and slamming into a wall with enough force to crack his power armor. When Kharn looked up, he saw Rogel Dawn standing over Sigismund, the Primarch's expression one of cold fury. Dawn had swatted Kharn aside like an insect, the casual gesture of a demigod dealing with a nuisance. For all of Kharn's enhanced strength, all the power Kharn had gifted him, he was nothing compared to a Primarch. Abaddon, leading a force of Sons of Horus, launched a desperate rescue operation to save Kharn from Dawn's wrath. The future War Master of Chaos knew that Kharn was too valuable to lose, that the World Eater's skills would be needed for what was to come. The counterattack forced Dawn to choose between pursuing Kharn and protecting his position, and the Primarch chose the latter. Kharn was dragged away by his rescuers, battered but alive, as the battle for the spaceport raged on. Despite the heroic efforts of the defenders, the spaceport eventually fell. Perturabo himself arrived with his Iron Warriors, bringing titans and overwhelming firepower to bear against the remaining Imperial Fist's positions. Dawn ordered a general withdrawal to the inner defenses, conceding the spaceport, but ensuring that his forces remained intact to defend the more crucial positions deeper in the palace. The loss was a blow to loyalist morale, but it was not fatal. The real test was yet to come. Kharn recovered from his injuries and threw himself back into the assault. The World Eaters pushed deeper into the palace complex, fighting through layer after layer of defenses. They assaulted the Eternity Wall spaceport, another major fortification that had to be taken before the traitors could advance on the Sanctum Imperialis. It was here that Kharn killed Janisha Kroll, commander of the Sisters of Silence, adding another legendary skull to his growing tally. The battle was brutal even by the standards of the siege. The Sisters of Silence, being psychic blanks, were immune to demonic powers and fought with savage skill. But they were not immune to chain axes, and Kharn tore through them with the same fury he brought to every engagement. As the siege ground on through solar weeks that felt like years, Kharn was everywhere. The fighting was thickest. He led assaults on fortified positions, cut down enemy champions in single combat, and left a trail of corpses that stretched for kilometers. His armor was painted red, not with dye but with blood, dried and caked so thickly that the original colors of the World Eaters were completely obscured. The nails no longer bothered with the illusion of consciousness between battles. Kharn existed in a state of permanent combat trance, sleeping only when physically incapable of continuing, waking to immediately resume killing. He was becoming less a warrior and more a natural disaster, a walking avatar of slaughter that consumed everything in its path. The climax of the siege came with the assault on the Eternity Gate, the final barrier before the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor resided. Here, Angron returned, leading his World Eaters in a final, desperate charge against the gate's defenders. The Blood Angels and Imperial Fists held the gate, led by Sanguinius and Dawn respectively. The fighting reached apocalyptic intensity. Demons manifested directly onto the battlefield. Titans walked among the infantry, firing weapons that vaporized entire squads. The very air seemed to burn with psychic fire as the Emperor's will clashed with the powers of chaos. Kharn fought in this hell alongside his brothers, killing until his weapons broke and then seizing new ones from the dead, advancing step by bloody step toward the gate that would not fall. Sanguinius himself confronted Angron before the gate. The two Primarchs clashed in a duel that shook the battlefield, the angel's nobility against the demon's fury. Sanguinius won. He managed to do what no one else had done in the entire siege. He banished Angron, sending the demon Primarch screaming back into the warp. With their father's defeat, the World Eaters' attack broke. Their coordination, never particularly strong, collapsed entirely. Many simply went berserk, attacking everything around them, friend and foe alike. Others fell back in confusion, unsure how to continue without Angron's presence driving them forward. Kharn did not retreat. He continued fighting, advancing alone through loyalist positions, killing anything that moved. He was beyond reason now, beyond any thought save the imperative to kill. The nails had consumed him entirely. He was Horn's weapon, pointed at the Emperor's palace and released without restraint. How long he fought alone, separated from his legion, is unknown. But when the siege finally ended, when Horus fell and the traitors began their desperate retreat, Kharn was found atop a mound of corpses. The mound was so high that it could be seen from kilometers away, a pyramid of the dead with a single figure at its summit. That figure was Kharn, and he was dead. His armor was breached in dozens of places. His body was broken beyond anything that Space Marine healing could repair. By any rational measure, he should not have survived even a tenth of the wounds he had sustained. But he had continued fighting until his body literally could no longer function, and only then had he finally fallen. His brothers found him and could not bring themselves to leave him behind. Even in death, he was their champion, the epitome of everything they had become. They carried his corpse away with them as they fought their way back to their ships, back to the landing zones, back to orbit, where the traitor fleet was already beginning its retreat. Aboard the Conqueror, Kharn's body was placed in the hold, while the remaining World Eaters captains argued about leadership. With Angron banished and unlikely to return soon, someone needed to take command of what remained of the Legion. But the World Eaters had been too thoroughly consumed by their bloodlust to maintain anything resembling a coherent command structure. Captain killed captain, as they argued, unable to resolve disputes through anything but violence. And it was in the middle of one such dispute, as fresh blood splashed across Kharn's corpse, that the impossible happened. Kharn's eyes opened. His heart, which had been still, began to beat again. He rose from where he had been laid, the wounds that should have killed him somehow sealed, his broken body somehow restored to function. Whether it was Kharn who breathed life back into his champion, or whether Kharn's own relentless spirit simply refused to accept death, or whether the nails themselves would not allow their host to rest, no one could say. But Kharn lived again, and in living, he brought a terrible clarity to the Legion's situation. They had lost. Terror was still in loyalist hands. The Emperor still lived. Horus was dead. Everything they had fought for, all the slaughter and sacrifice, had been for nothing. The World Eaters retreated into the Eye of Terror with the other traitor legions, licking their wounds and trying to comprehend the magnitude of their failure. But failure was not a concept the nails allowed for easy processing. The World Eaters needed to kill, and if they could not kill loyalists, they would find other targets. The Legion Wars were beginning, and in those wars, the World Eaters would find themselves fighting not just against other traitor legions, but against themselves. The retreat, a legion fracturing the Great Scouring, As the Imperium's counteroffensive against the retreating traitor legions became known, was a time of desperate flight for the forces of chaos. The loyalist Space Marines, empowered by their victory and enraged by the devastation the traitors had wrought, pursued with relentless fury. Robert Guillemot, the newly appointed Lord Commander of the Imperium, coordinated the counteroffensive with characteristic efficiency. The goal was not merely to defeat the traitors, but to annihilate them, to ensure they could never threaten Terra again. For the World Eaters, fleeing deeper into the galaxy toward the Eye of Terror, this was a time of constant combat and mounting losses. The World Eaters' fleet was badly damaged. Ships that had participated in the siege bore the scars of orbital combat. Their hulls breached and their systems barely functional. Worse, the Legion had been separated during the retreat. Many World Eaters found themselves cut off from the main fleet, forced to make their own way to the Eye of Terror while being hunted by Loyalist forces. A significant portion of the Legion fell under the control of Devourer's officer Goghur, rather than remaining under what passed for Central Command. The fragmentation that would eventually destroy the Legion was already beginning, even as they fled for their lives. For warriors driven by the Butcher's nails, this constant retreat was agony. The nails demanded violence, demanded they turn and fight, but military necessity required them to run. The contradiction created intolerable stress. World Eaters began attacking each other over minor disagreements, unable to restrain their aggression when denied external targets. Others had to be imprisoned in their own ships, locked in cargo holds like feral animals, because they could no longer function in anything resembling a military organization. The most far gone were either executed or, in a fate many considered worse, forced into dreadnought sarcophagi, their still living but uncontrollable bodies entombed in walking war machines. The dreadnought solution was particularly cruel for World Eaters. A dreadnought exists in a state of suspended animation between battles, waking only when needed, sleeping for years or decades between activations. For a warrior driven by the nails, this sleep was not rest but torture. They would wake to brief, violent interludes of combat, claiming skulls and satisfying the nails' demands, and then be forced back into sleep where the pain returned, but no relief was possible. Some World Eaters' dreadnoughts went mad from this cycle, their minds fragmenting under the strain. They would wake screaming, attacking anything within reach, requiring their brothers to subdue them and force them back into dormancy. Others simply refused to sleep, fighting any attempt to deactivate them, preferring to remain conscious and in pain rather than face the nightmare of suspended animation. The World Eaters' fleet itself was in dire condition. Ships that had been magnificent vessels at the heresy's start were now barely functional hulks, held together through a combination of emergency repairs and sheer stubbornness. The Conqueror, flagship of the Legion, bore the scars of dozens of void battles. Its hull was breached in multiple locations, sealed with whatever materials the tech marines could scavenge. Its weapon systems operated at perhaps 60% effectiveness. Its warp drive was so unstable that every jump risked catastrophic failure. Yet it continued to function, carrying the remnants of the Legion toward the Eye of Terror and whatever uncertain future awaited them there. Morale, such as it existed among beings who barely understood the concept anymore, was non-existent. The World Eaters had believed in victory. They had followed Horus because he promised them eternal war and the chance to finally strike back against the Emperor who had wronged Angron. They had bled across the galaxy, killed on countless worlds, stood upon the very walls of the Imperial Palace, and come within sight of the throne room itself. And it had all been for nothing. Horus was dead. The Emperor was crippled but still alive. Terror remained in Loyalist hands. The Imperium endured. All their sacrifice, all their slaughter, had accomplished exactly nothing beyond ensuring they could never return to the Imperium, never know anything but exile and endless war in the Eye's madness. Kharn, mysteriously resurrected and bearing wounds that should have killed him 10 times over, found himself in an impossible position. Many World Eaters looked to him for leadership. He had been Angron's equerry, the Primarch's right hand throughout the heresy. He had survived when so many had fallen. He had been returned from death itself. Surely this meant Kharn favored him, meant he was destined to lead the Legion into whatever future awaited them. But Kharn himself was barely holding on to coherence. The nails had been bad before terror. Now they were overwhelming. Every moment of consciousness was pain unless he was killing. Every interaction with his brothers tested his ability to not simply attack them on instinct. The Legion needed a home. They needed a place within the Eye of Terror where they could regroup, repair their ships, rebuild their strength. The Eye was a vast region of space where the warp and reality overlapped, where the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules, and where demon worlds offered sanctuary to those who could claim them. Many traitor legions were scrambling to establish footholds in the Eye, carving out territories and fortifying them against both loyalist pursuit and rival traitors. The World Eaters needed to do the same if they were to survive as anything more than scattered pirates and raiders. It was during this search for a new homeworld that the Legion Wars truly began. With the unity of purpose that the siege had provided now gone, old rivalries between traitor legions resurfaced. The Emperor's Children, another legion that had fallen to chaos, had descended into hedonistic excess in service to Slaanesh. Where the World Eaters were all brutal efficiency and violence, the Emperor's Children sought sensation and experience in all forms. The two legions had never gotten along, and now, competing for territory in the Eye of Terror, their rivalry turned to open warfare. When both forces discovered the demon world of Scalathrax at roughly the same time, conflict became inevitable. Scalathrax should have been perfect. Located in a pocket of relative stability within the Eye of Terror, it offered the strategic location and defensible position that any legion would need for a base of operations. The planet itself was covered in ancient Xenos ruins that could be converted into fortifications. There were resources that could be exploited, warp rifts that could be used for travel, and enough inherent chaos corruption that it wouldn't immediately kill anyone who tried to live there. The Emperor's Children had been first to find it and were already establishing their presence when the World Eaters arrived, making their own claim to the world. The world itself bore the scars of whatever civilization had built it. Massive structures of unidentifiable material rose from the planet's surface, their purposes long forgotten, their builders extinct for millennia before mankind ever reached the stars. Some of these structures still functioned, after a fashion, powered by principles that defied Imperial understanding. Energy fields flickered in dead chambers, mechanical systems activated and deactivated according to patterns that might have been programming or might have been random chance. The Xenos who had built this place had possessed technology far in advance of the Imperium, and even in ruin, their works remained formidable. The Emperor's Children had claimed the largest of these structures as their base, converting its vast halls into temples of excess where they could indulge their Slaaneshi devotions in peace. They brought artifacts and slaves, musicians and torturers, everything necessary to satisfy their increasingly baroque desires. The World Eaters, arriving to find the best positions already taken, responded with characteristic diplomacy. They attacked. The first clash between the two legions was brief and brutal, a skirmish that killed dozens on both sides before both forces pulled back to assess the situation. The Emperor's Children expected the World Eaters to negotiate, perhaps to accept a secondary position on the planet in exchange for peace. They had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, that the World Eaters were incapable of such compromises anymore. The battle that developed consumed weeks of local time, though time itself was difficult to measure on Scalathrax. The Eye of Terror's influence made days longer or shorter seemingly at random, and the planet's own rotation defied prediction. Both legions threw themselves into the conflict with the fervor of their respective devotions. The Emperor's Children fought with baroque creativity, using sonic weapons that could liquefy internal organs and esoteric devices that killed through sensation overload. The World Eaters fought with simple brutality, chain axes and bolt pistols, relying on shock assault and overwhelming aggression to carry positions. The ruined city where they fought became a hellscape of burning buildings and blood-soaked streets. Negotiations, such as they were, broke down almost immediately. Kharn insulted the Emperor's children representative, called them weak and degenerate, accused them of caring more for pleasure than for proper worship of the Chaos Gods. The representative, a captain named Draga, responded by shooting Kharn in the head. That the shot failed to kill Kharn, instead only enraging him further, made the situation worse rather than better. Both legions prepared for war, mustering what forces they had on and around Scalathrax for what they assumed would be a brief, decisive campaign. The World Eaters would crush the Emperor's children through sheer aggression, or so they thought. What none of them anticipated was that Scalathrax itself would prove to be the most dangerous enemy on the battlefield. The planet had an orbital pattern and climate system unlike anything in normal space. Due to the way warp energies interacted with its rotation, Scalathrax experienced temperature extremes that defied logic. During the day, when the ancient sun hung in the sky, temperatures were manageable, if harsh. But when night fell, the temperature plummeted to depths that could kill even a space marine in power armor within minutes. The night lasted for local weeks, an extended period of cold so absolute that exposed flesh froze instantly and armor plating became brittle enough to shatter at a touch. Even inside fortifications, even inside heated buildings, survival became a desperate gamble against the elements. The World Eaters attacked the Emperor's children positions with their characteristic fury, pushing deep into the enemy-held territories before the first night began to fall. They were winning, by their metrics. Skulls were being claimed by the thousands. The Emperor's children were being driven back, their sonic weapons and exotic armor no match for massed chain-axe charges. Victory seemed inevitable, and then the temperature began to drop. Both sides, monitoring the planet's climate patterns, recognized the danger. An unspoken ceasefire formed as both legions retreated to shelter, seeking the protection of buildings and underground facilities that might shield them from the killing cold of the Scalathrax night. For the World Eaters, this retreat was agony. They had been on the verge of victory. The enemy was broken and fleeing. All that remained was to pursue and finish them. But the cold would not allow pursuit. Stand outside in the night, and even power armor would not save you. Your blood would freeze. Your tissues would become solid. You would die, simple as that. So the World Eaters huddled in their shelters, surrounded by enemies who were doing the same in adjacent buildings, and waited for the night to pass so they could resume killing. It was an intolerable situation. The nails screamed in their skulls. They were warriors, not cowards who hid from weather. And then, Kharn made a decision that would echo through 10,000 years of history. The night of madness, when brothers burned. The shelters were scattered throughout the ruined city, where the World Eaters and Emperor's children had been fighting. Ancient structures that had once belonged to some long-extinct xeno species, now repurposed as desperate refugees against Scalathrax's lethal night. Inside these buildings, World Eaters stood watch, waiting for the cold to pass, cleaning their weapons and tending to their armor. They were restless. The nails did not understand waiting. Violence had been taken from them, and in its absence, the pain was beginning to mount. But they endured because the alternative was death. And even World Eaters were not quite insane enough to throw their lives away for no purpose. Kharn stood at the entrance to one such shelter, looking out at the frozen wasteland the city had become. The temperature had dropped to depths that registered as pure death on his armor's sensors. Nothing could survive out there. Nothing should try. And yet, as he stood there, feeling the nails dig deeper into his brain with every passing moment, Kharn felt something crystallize in his mind. It was not thought, exactly. The nails had long since destroyed his capacity for complex reasoning. But it was a realization, a recognition of something fundamental that had been building throughout the retreat from terror. They were cowards, all of them. His legion, supposedly the fiercest warriors the galaxy had ever known, were hiding from cold weather like mortal soldiers. They had been on the cusp of victory, and they had retreated. They had abandoned the field to wait out the night, as if survival mattered more than victory. This was not what they were supposed to be. This was not what Angron had made them. The nails were not gifts to make them more efficient or more tactical. They were transformations meant to strip away the weaknesses that held warriors back. Fear of death, concern for survival, the cowardly instinct to retreat when conditions became unfavorable. All of these were weaknesses, and they had been supposed to purge them. But here they were, hiding in buildings, waiting like frightened children for the danger to pass. Kharn's vision of what they had become clashed violently with his understanding of what they should be. The disconnect was unbearable. The nails agreed. They sang in his skull, a chorus of pain and demand that had a simple solution. If his brothers were too weak to continue the battle, then he would give them no choice. He would drive them forward. He would show them what it meant to be world eaters, to be the sons of Angron, to be the true servants of Kharn. He would burn away their cowardice. Kharn turned away from the frozen wasteland and walked deeper into the shelter. He found the weapons cache where the World Eaters had stored their ammunition and support weapons. Among the flamers and melters, the heavy bolters and missile launchers, he selected a simple flamer. The weapon was crude by the standards of Astartes war gear, little more than a tank of promethium with an ignition mechanism. But it would serve. He checked the fuel levels, found them satisfactory, and primed the weapon. Then he walked back toward the shelter entrance, where his brothers were beginning to notice his actions with growing confusion. One World Eater, a veteran sergeant whose name has been lost to history, asked Kharn what he was doing. The question was answered with a gout of flame that engulfed the entrance to the shelter and began to spread to the building's support structures. The World Eaters inside recoiled from the sudden heat, more from surprise than actual danger. Power armor could withstand flame easily enough, but then they realized what Kharn was doing. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was destroying their shelter, burning away the walls and ceiling that protected them from the lethal cold outside. He was driving them out into the night. World Eaters rushed toward Kharn, trying to stop him, to disarm him, to restrain him before he could kill them all through exposure. But Kharn met them with Gorechild in his other hand. The chain axe roared to life, its teeth spinning so fast they blurred. The first World Eater to reach him was cut in half, his power armor parting like cloth before the ancient weapon. The second lost his head, the third his arms. Kharn moved through his brothers like death incarnate, killing any who tried to stop him while continuing to burn their shelter with methodical thoroughness. Those who tried to extinguish the flames found themselves targeted by Gorechild. Those who tried to flee found themselves driven forward by the spreading inferno. The shelter became an oven, the temperature inside rising even as the temperature outside dropped to lethal depths. The World Eaters were given a choice with no good options: stay inside and burn, or flee into the cold and freeze. Most chose the cold, bursting out of the burning building into the night, where the temperature was 100 degrees below zero. Their armor protected them for a time. But armor could only do so much against cold that defied natural law. Systems began to fail. Joints stiffened. The World Eaters who had fled the shelter looked around desperately for new refuge and found other shelters nearby. Shelters that were still intact. Shelters that might save them. Those shelters were occupied by other World Eaters and Emperor's children. A World Eater, freezing to death in the open, hammered on the door of such a shelter and demanded entry. But the shelter was at capacity. There was no room. The door stayed closed. The freezing World Eater, driven past reason by the nails and the desperate need to survive, broke down the door through brute force and threw out the weakest occupant to make room for himself. That occupant, now exposed to the cold, sought shelter elsewhere, displacing someone else. A chain reaction began to spread through the city as world eaters and emperors' children fought each other for the increasingly limited shelter space. Kharn did not stay at the first shelter. He moved through the night, somehow surviving the cold that killed others, driven forward by the nails and whatever dark power sustained him. He found another shelter and burned it, then another. Every building he found, every refuge his brothers had taken, he destroyed. Behind him, the city began to burn. The flames spread faster than anyone anticipated, fed by chemicals and materials in the ancient structures that reacted violently when heated. What had been a controlled demolition of specific shelters became a raging inferno that consumed entire city blocks. The fires created their own weather system, updrafts of superheated air clashing with the freezing night temperatures to create winds that spread the flames even faster. World eaters and emperors' children found themselves caught between burning buildings and frozen wasteland, with nowhere safe to retreat. Some tried to wait it out in partially destroyed structures, gambling that they could survive a night half exposed to the elements. Others ran, searching desperately for any shelter Kharn had not yet reached, and some, driven mad by the impossible choice between fire and ice, simply began to attack everything around them. World Eater turned on World Eater. The legion that had survived the Siege of Terror, that had fought its way through the Great Scouring, began to tear itself apart on Skalathrax. Brothers who had fought side by side for decades turned on each other, fighting for shelter, for resources, for no reason at all, beyond the fact that the nails demanded violence and the nearest target was another World Eater. The Emperor's children found themselves caught in the madness, attacked by World Eaters who no longer distinguished between allies and enemies. They responded in kind, their sonic weapons adding to the chaos as buildings collapsed and warriors died in droves. The screaming was the worst part, worse even than the violence itself. Thousands of World Eaters and Emperor's children, all vocalizing their rage and pain and terror, created a chorus of madness that echoed through the burning city. Some were screaming because they were dying, torn apart by chain axes or crushed beneath collapsing structures. Others were screaming because the nails were driving them past the boundaries of sanity, past any ability to process what was happening to them. And some were screaming in something that might have been exultation, celebrating the purity of the violence, the freedom from any pretense of brotherhood or loyalty or purpose beyond the immediate satisfaction of killing. The fires created by Kharn's rampage spread faster than should have been possible. The ancient Xenos materials that composed many of the structures reacted to heat in unpredictable ways. Some melted like wax, creating rivers of molten alloy that flowed through the streets and trapped warriors who were too slow to escape. Others exploded, showering the battlefield with shrapnel that could penetrate even power armor. Still others released gases that were toxic even to space marines, forcing warriors to seal their helmets and rely on internal air supplies that wouldn't last through the night. The city was not just burning, it was dying, and it was taking everyone within it down with it. Through this hell walked Kharn, somehow immune to both the fire and the cold. His power armor should have failed in the temperature extremes, systems freezing or overheating depending on his proximity to the flames. But he continued forward with the inevitability of a natural disaster, burning every shelter he found, killing every warrior who tried to stop him. His armor was so covered in blood and ash that the original colors were completely obscured, making him look like a walking corpse, a revenant of bronze and crimson moving through smoke and flame. World Eaters who saw him tried to flee, recognizing that confronting him meant death. But there was nowhere to flee to. The shelters were burning. The cold would kill anyone who stayed outside too long. Death was approaching from every direction, and Kharn was simply one of its many faces. The World Eaters who survived the night did so through luck more than skill. Some found shelter in partially collapsed structures that Kharn had missed in his rampage. Others discovered underground chambers in the Xenos ruins, places deep enough that neither fire nor cold could reach them. A few simply kept moving, fighting through the entire night, their fury sustaining them where rational thought would have failed. These survivors were the strongest, the most consumed by the nails, the ones who had moved so far beyond humanity that they no longer needed things like shelter or rest. They were weapons that thought barely, and weapons did not require comfort. By the time dawn finally came, the casualties were catastrophic. Both legions had lost thousands of warriors. The city was a smoking ruin, buildings reduced to skeletal frames, streets choked with corpses both burned and frozen. The World Eaters who had entered Scalathrax as a unified force, damaged but intact, emerged as dozens of separate warbands who viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. Trust was dead. Brotherhood was dead. The Legion itself was dead, killed not by loyalist forces or rival traitors, but by one of their own, by a warrior who had decided that weakness had to be purged no matter the cost. A World Eater named Centurion Gruner, who had been Kharn's original instructor back when the Legion was still called the Warhounds, gathered a squad of warriors and went hunting for Kharn. They found him in the heart of the burning city, standing amidst the flames like a demon made flesh. Gruner tried to reason with his former student, tried to remind him of brotherhood and duty, tried to make him see the madness of what he was doing. Kharn's response was to attack. The squad fought desperately, but they were no match for a warrior who had bested Sigismund, who had survived wounds that should have killed him a dozen times over, who fought with the full blessing of Kharn flowing through his veins. Gruner fell last, backing away through the corpses of his battle brothers as Kharn advanced with Gorechild raised high. In his final moments, Gruner cursed Kharn, called him betrayer, accused him of destroying everything they had built, but Kharn merely laughed, a sound devoid of sanity or mercy. He told Gruner that the contest was over, referring to some internal accounting that only made sense within his own deteriorating mind. He claimed he had been the last to leave Terra, that his body had been broken after slaying 1 million of the Emperor's servants. He had won whatever game they had been playing. And now, seeing the weakness in his brothers, the weakness that had cost them Terra, he was purging that weakness in the only way he knew how. Gorechild descended, and Gruner died cursing the name that would haunt the World Eaters forever after, Kharn the Betrayer. The night lasted for weeks by the local calendar, though time had little meaning on Scalathrax. The World Eaters who survived did so by becoming animals, fighting and killing and fleeing in an endless cycle of violence. The Emperor's children fared little better, their own excesses turning inward as they began to attack each other for entertainment and sensation. By the time the sun finally rose and the temperature returned to something survivable, both legions were shattered. The World Eaters had lost any semblance of unity. Warlords who had survived gathered the warriors closest to them and simply left, departing Scalathrax to seek their own destinies elsewhere in the Eye of Terror. The Emperor's children did the same, fragmenting into countless warbands. Kharn walked the frozen city after the night ended, surveying the corpse-strewn ruins of what had been a legion. He felt no regret. The nails would not allow regret. He felt satisfaction. He had purged the weakness. He had shown them the truth. They were weapons, not soldiers. They existed only to kill. Everything else, every other consideration or loyalty or bond of brotherhood, was a weakness that had to be burned away. This was what Angron had tried to teach them. This was what the nails were for. And now, finally, the lesson had been learned. The flamer he had used to start the burning had gained a name. It would be called the Burning Brand of Scalathrax, and it would become a relic passed down through 10,000 years, a reminder of the night when a legion died. Kharn took the weapon with him when he left the planet. though he would not always carry it. Gorechild was enough. Gorechild and the endless hunger of Kharn, driving him forward to the next battle, the next skull, the next moment of relief from the Nail's eternal song. Aftermath. A scattered legion. The Battle of Scalathrax marked the end of the World Eaters as a unified Space Marine legion. What had been a coherent military force of thousands of warriors, commanded by captains and coordinating their actions toward common goals, shattered into hundreds of individual warbands. Each warband was led by whoever had survived the night, with enough followers to constitute a force. Some warbands numbered in the hundreds. Others were mere squads, a dozen warriors at most, bound together by proximity and the simple fact that they had not killed each other yet. The World Eaters had become exactly what their nature demanded. Individuals focused entirely on personal glory and the accumulation of skulls, with no loyalty beyond the immediate satisfaction of the Nails. These scattered warbands developed their own cultures and methods, or what passes for culture, among beings driven by the Nails. Some became raiders, attacking Imperial worlds at random for the simple joy of slaughter. They would descend from the warp without warning, kill everything they encountered, and depart before Imperial reinforcements could arrive, leaving behind worlds that had been transformed into graveyards. Others became mercenaries, selling their services to Chaos warlords who needed shock troops for particularly dangerous assaults. These warbands were more dangerous than random raiders because they operated with at least minimal tactical coordination, enough to achieve objectives beyond simple carnage. A few warbands attempted to establish something resembling permanent bases within the Eye of Terror. These efforts rarely lasted long. World Eaters could not maintain the discipline necessary for logistics and fortification. They would build a fortress, garrison it, and then within months or years, the garrison would turn on itself, fighting over imagined slights or simple boredom. The fortress would be abandoned, left to rot in the warp's corruption, while the survivors scattered to find new battles. The longest-lasting World Eater settlements were those that maintained a constant supply of external enemies, places where the garrison could direct their aggression outward rather than inward. But even these eventually fell to internal strife. The recruitment methods employed by World Eaters' warbands varied wildly. Few had the facilities or technical knowledge to create new Space Marines through the traditional process. Those who did often produced monstrosities, aspirants who survived the implantation of gene seed and organs, but emerged as little more than feral animals, their minds so damaged by poorly executed surgery that they could barely follow simple commands. The most successful warbands employed berserker surgeons, apothecaries who had been consumed by their devotion to Kharn and had developed new methods of creating warriors. These methods were quick, brutal, and produced warriors who were barely more than organic killing machines. But they worked, and that was all that mattered to the Blood God. Some warbands took a different approach entirely, capturing loyalist Space Marines and subjecting them to psycho-corrective surgery that transformed them into World Eaters. This process was horrific even by Chaos standards, involving the forced implantation of butcher's nails, while simultaneously conditioning the victim to reject their former identity and embrace Kharn's worship. The success rate was low. Many subjects died screaming on the operating tables, their enhanced physiology unable to cope with the neural damage. Those who survived emerged as broken things, warriors who retained the combat skills of their former lives, but had lost everything else that made them who they were. They were World Eaters in truth, defined by the nails rather than by any shared genetic heritage. In the modern era, the World Eaters are defined not by gene seed, but by two things: the butcher's nails and devotion to Kharn. A warrior can be born from any legion's gene seed, but if they undergo the implantation of the nails and dedicate themselves to the Blood God, they become a World Eater in truth. This has created a strange diversity within the warbands, Space Marines of different genetic lineages fighting side by side, united only by their shared servitude to pain and violence. The nails are the great equalizer, stripping away everything that made warriors distinct and leaving only the basic template: kill, claim skulls, serve Kharn. Kharn himself became a wandering champion, fighting wherever Kharn's will directed him, unlike many world eaters who established small kingdoms within the Eye of Terror or hired themselves out as mercenaries to other chaos forces. Kharn sought no territory and accepted no permanent allegiances. He would appear at battles across the galaxy, drawn by some instinct or divine guidance to places where the slaughter would be greatest. Sometimes he fought alone, a singular berserker cutting through armies. Sometimes he gathered followers, world eaters, and other ornate warriors who were drawn to his legend and fought in his wake, claiming the skulls he did not bother to collect. But these followers were temporary. Kharn had no interest in leading. He was interested only in killing. His appearances have become the stuff of nightmares for Imperial commanders. There is no pattern to when or where he will strike, no way to predict his movements or anticipate his arrival. He might appear on a peaceful agri-world, slaughtering its entire population over the course of solar weeks before vanishing back into the warp. He might manifest in the middle of a major Imperial offensive, cutting through guard regiments and space marine companies with equal ease. He might join a Black Crusade for a time, adding his strength to the assault, and then disappear just as suddenly when some other battle calls to him more strongly. Kharn fights because he must, because the nails allow him no choice, because Kharn demands it, and the alternative to serving is death, true death. And even Kharn is not quite ready for that final rest. The warriors who have survived encounters with Kharn speak of him with a mixture of terror and respect. He moves through battle with a fluidity that seems impossible for a warrior in power armor, every motion economical and precise, despite the apparent frenzy of his attacks. He never stops moving, never gives his enemies a moment to coordinate a response, flowing from target to target, like water finding the path of least resistance. His chain axe, Gorechild, has become as legendary as its wielder, a weapon that has tasted the blood of countless heroes and left their broken bodies in its wake. To face Kharn in battle is to face death itself, clad in blood-stained ceramite and driven by inhuman hunger. The title Betrayer followed him. Other world eaters spoke it with a mixture of hatred and respect. He had destroyed their legion, yes, but in doing so, he had freed them from the weaknesses that had held them back. No longer did they need to pretend at being soldiers, at following orders, at caring about strategic objectives. They could simply kill, following the nails to whatever battlefield called to them. And if they died, well, that was the fate every world eater welcomed. Kharn had shown them the truth of their existence. They were weapons of Kharn, nothing more, nothing less. Some hated him for this revelation. Others worshipped him for it. All knew his name. For 10,000 years, Kharn has carved a path of destruction across the galaxy. He fought in the Legion Wars, the conflicts between traitor legions within the Eye of Terror, killing world eaters and emperors' children with equal enthusiasm. He participated in Black Crusades when the forces of chaos erupted from the Eye to assault the Imperium. Always at the forefront of the bloodiest battles, he has killed autarchs and war bosses, hive tyrants and necron overlords, any being strong enough to be worth offering to Kharn. His tally of kills defies counting. Some sources claim he has killed millions, others say billions. The truth is that Kharn himself does not know or care. He kills because the nails demand it, because Kharn commands it, because it is the only thing he knows how to do. When the Great Rift tore reality apart in the 41st Millennium, Kharn sensed the presence of Saint Celestine, a living saint of the Emperor, on the planet of Sadreka. He traveled there specifically to claim her skull, carving through loyalist defenses with single-minded purpose. When he finally confronted Celestine, the duel was brief and brutal. The living saint, for all her power and divine protection, could not withstand Kharn's assault. He killed her, though she would later be resurrected by the Emperor's will, and claimed her skull for his patron. It was just another kill in a lifetime of killing, remarkable only because the victim was remarkable. The return of Angron changed things, briefly. The demon Primarch emerged from the warp during the Arcs of Omen campaign, and for the first time since the heresy, the World Eaters had something resembling unified leadership. Kharn, along with other prominent World Eaters warlords like Kosolax and Karaka Bloodfist, gathered around their father. It was a shadow of what the Legion had once been, temporary and unstable, held together only by Angron's presence and the shared opportunity to wage war on a scale they had not seen in millennia. But even this reunion could not last. The World Eaters are too far gone, too consumed by the Nails and Kharn's influence, to maintain anything resembling cohesion for long. Kharn's current activities are unknown, as they always are until he appears at a battlefield somewhere in the galaxy. He is sustained by Horn's favor, immune to aging, nearly impossible to kill, driven forward by forces beyond human comprehension. He has become exactly what the Nails were designed to create, a being that exists only for violence, that finds meaning only in the act of killing, that has no purpose beyond the accumulation of skulls for the Blood God. The man who was once captain of the 8th Assault Company, who was friends with warriors from other legions, who served his Primarch with something approaching loyalty, is gone. Only the betrayer remains. And yet, there are moments, brief and rare, where something of the old Kharn surfaces. When he faces particularly skilled opponents, there is a flicker of the warrior who once sparred with Sigismund for the joy of testing his skills. When he encounters World Eaters from before Skalathrax, there is sometimes a moment of recognition, a pause before the killing resumes. These moments never last. The Nails do not allow for sentiment or reflection, but they suggest that somewhere, buried beneath 10,000 years of bloodshed and the overwhelming influence of Horn, a fragment of consciousness still exists. Whether this makes Kharn's existence more tragic or less is a question with no good answer. Reflections on the Betrayer, Tragedy and Transformation. The story of Kharn the Betrayer is not unique in the grim darkness of the far future. The galaxy is filled with fallen heroes, corrupted champions, warriors who began with noble intentions and ended as monsters. But Kharn's fall has a particular quality that makes it especially tragic. He did not choose damnation out of ambition or anger. He did not willingly embrace chaos seeking power or immortality. His transformation was inflicted upon him, one surgical implant at a time, his humanity carved away by devices designed to destroy the capacity for anything beyond rage. The Butcher's Nails did not give Kharn new abilities. They took away everything that made him human and left only the weapons in his hands and the hunger to use them. This makes Kharn's betrayal on Skalathrax both horrifying and almost understandable. From his perspective, warped by the Nails and Kharn's influence, he was not betraying his brothers. He was saving them. He was showing them what they had always been meant to be, stripping away the last pretenses of military discipline and strategic thinking to reveal the pure essence of the World Eater. A being who exists only to kill, who finds purpose only in violence, who has been freed from the weaknesses that hold lesser warriors back. The fact that this liberation required him to burn his own brothers alive, to destroy the last remnants of their legion's unity, was unfortunate but necessary. Weakness had to be purged, and mercy was the greatest weakness of all. The tragedy is that Kharn was right, in a twisted way. The World Eaters were never going to be anything other than what they became. From the moment Angron demanded that his sons share his suffering, from the moment the first nails were implanted into Space Marine brains, the Legion was doomed. They might have maintained some pretense of military structure for a time, but eventually, the nails would drive them to exactly what happened on Skalathrax. Kharn simply accelerated the inevitable, ripping off the bandage rather than letting it slowly peel away. The World Eaters, as a unified legion, were already dead. Kharn just made it official. But there's another way to view the events on Skalathrax, one less colored by Kharn's madness. From this perspective, what Kharn did was the final destruction of his legion's soul. The World Eaters before Scalathrax were monsters, yes, but they were monsters who fought for each other, who maintained some bonds of brotherhood, who could still work together toward common goals, even if those goals were horrific. After Scalathrax, they were just individual killing machines, scattered across the galaxy with no loyalty to anyone or anything beyond their own hunger for violence. Kharn did not liberate them. He isolated them, reducing each World Eater to a singular, lonely existence of endless slaughter. This is not freedom. This is the ultimate prison, one where the bars are made of pain and the only respite comes through acts that damn the soul further. The Space Marines of the Imperium study the events of Scalathrax as a cautionary tale about the dangers of losing discipline and unity. The lesson they draw is simple. A Space Marine without his brothers is diminished, vulnerable, lost. The chapter system that Guilliman implemented after the heresy exists in part to prevent exactly what happened to the World Eaters, ensuring that no single commander could ever control enough Space Marines to threaten the Imperium again, but also ensuring that Space Marines would always fight as part of a larger brotherhood. Even the most independent chapters, like the Space Wolves or Black Templars, maintain strong internal bonds and unit cohesion. To fight alone is to court the same fate as the World Eaters, scattered and diminished, powerful as individuals, but strategically irrelevant. The World Eaters themselves rarely reflect on Scalathrax, at least not in ways that would be recognizable as reflection to anyone else. The nails do not allow for introspection or regret, but there are moments, usually just before death, when a World Eater will remember what it was like to fight alongside brothers who watched his back, who shared his victories, who mourned his wounds. These memories are painful in ways that have nothing to do with the nails, and they are quickly suppressed. Better to remember nothing but the next kill, the next skull, the next moment of relief from the constant agony. Memory is a weakness, and weakness must be purged. Kharn himself has spoken about Scalathrax only rarely, and when he does, his words reveal a mind so far gone that understanding his perspective becomes almost impossible. He sees himself as Khorne's favored champion, blessed above all others, with the clarity to see what truly matters. He believes that by destroying the World Eaters' Legion, he freed his brothers from the burden of pretending to be something they were not. He believes that the scattered warbands are stronger, more pure, more true to their nature than the unified Legion ever was. Whether he actually believes this, or whether these are rationalizations generated by a mind that can no longer process the horror of what it has done, is unclear. Perhaps there is no difference. Perhaps for Kharn, belief and rationalization have become the same thing. What cannot be denied is Kharn's effectiveness as a warrior. For 10,000 years, he has survived against odds that would destroy any other being. He has fought the greatest heroes of the Imperium and walked away victorious. He has led assaults that broke armies and toppled worlds. He is, by any measure, one of the most deadly individual warriors in the galaxy, exceeded only by Primarchs and perhaps a handful of other beings of comparable power. This effectiveness is what makes him so dangerous and what makes the World Eaters, even scattered and diminished, still a significant threat. A single warband of World Eaters can devastate entire sectors. Kharn alone can bring death on a scale that requires fleets to stop. But effectiveness as a weapon is not the same as success as a being. Kharn has achieved nothing beyond killing. He has built nothing, created nothing, influenced nothing beyond the immediate area where his chain axe swings. He is a perfect weapon, and weapons, no matter how deadly, serve someone else's purpose. In Kharn's case, he serves Khorne, adding skulls to an infinite throne in service of a god who cares nothing for individual worshippers beyond what they can provide. Kharn will never know peace, never know rest, never know anything beyond the nails' constant demands and the fleeting relief that comes through violence. This is not a life. This is a prison sentence that lasts forever, and the only crime was being unlucky enough to survive the nail's implantation. The ultimate tragedy of Kharn is not that he fell from grace. It is that he was pushed. The Emperor allowed Angron to remain broken. The Imperium allowed the nails to be implanted into an entire legion. The structure of the Great Crusade created situations where the World Eater's particular brand of violence was not just tolerated, but encouraged. Every step along the path to damnation was paved by decisions made by beings who should have known better, who had the power to prevent the catastrophe, but chose not to. Kharn was a victim of the nails, of Angron's suffering, of the Emperor's cold pragmatism, of a galaxy that has no room for compassion or mercy. And he became the betrayer, a title that should haunt not just him, but everyone who helped make him into the monster he is now. Conclusion: the echo of madness. We stand now at the end of our tale, having traced the path from Kharn the warrior to Kharn the betrayer, from a united legion to scattered warbands, from the dream of heresy's triumph to the nightmare of 10,000 years of endless war. The Night of Madness on Scalathrax was not simply one battle among countless millions. It was the death of the last illusion, the final admission that the World Eaters could never be anything other than what the nails had made them. Weapons without will, killers without purpose. Champions of a god who cares only for the blood they spill and the skulls they claim, indifferent to their suffering or their fates. The story of Kharn serves as a dark mirror to the Imperium's own transformation. Just as Kharn was changed by the nails into something barely human, the Imperium itself changed during the heresy into something barely recognizable from what the Emperor had intended. The dream of a secular, rational society governed by reason and science died with Horus's betrayal. What emerged was a theocratic nightmare, an empire that worships the Emperor as a god while crushing any dissent in the name of unity and survival. The zealotry that Sigismund represented at the siege has become the default mode of imperial existence. In fighting monsters, the Imperium became monstrous. But perhaps the most important lesson from Kharn's story is about the danger of stripping away humanity in the name of effectiveness. The nails made the World Eaters more deadly in combat, yes. They removed fear and doubt and hesitation, creating warriors who would charge into certain death without pause. But they also destroyed everything that made those warriors valuable beyond simple battlefield utility. The World Eaters before the nails could think tactically, could coordinate complex operations, could function as a military organization capable of sustained campaigns. After the nails, they could do none of these things. They became less valuable strategically, even as they became more dangerous tactically. Efficiency is not the same as effectiveness, and the nails proved this at terrible cost. The scattered warbands of World Eaters that plague the galaxy today are a constant reminder of Scalathrax's legacy. Wherever they appear, slaughter follows. They cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, cannot be turned aside by anything except overwhelming force. They are the universe's punishment for the sins of the heresy, a curse that can never be lifted because the World Eaters themselves are beyond redemption. They will fight until they are destroyed, and even then, Kharn will likely resurrect them to fight again, trapped in an eternal cycle of violence that serves no purpose beyond feeding a god's endless appetite. And Kharn walks among them, the first betrayer and the most enduring, a living monument to the heresy's cost. He is feared by loyalists and traitors alike. The former know him as death incarnate, the warrior who has claimed more skulls than any other champion of Kharn. The latter know him as the one who destroyed his own legion, whose presence brings not unity, but the certainty that before long, someone will die, and it might well be the person standing next to him. Kharn has become exactly what the galaxy expects of Chaos champions: utterly destructive, completely reliable in his treachery, and absolutely unstoppable until the moment he is stopped. Yet for all the horror of his existence, there remains something almost admirable about Kharn's consistency. He has never claimed to be anything other than what he is. He does not dress up his actions in philosophy or justify his violence with grand visions of the future. He kills because the nails demand it, because Kharn commands it, because it is what he was made to do. In a galaxy filled with beings who commit atrocities while claiming noble motives, there is a brutal honesty to Kharn's approach. He is a monster, yes, but at least he is an honest monster. He has never pretended otherwise. The World Eaters will likely never reunite as a legion. The damage done on Scalathrax is too fundamental, the transformation too complete. They exist now as individuals and small groups, each pursuing their own path to glory in Kharn's eyes, occasionally gathering around figures like Kharn or their resurrected Primarch Angron, but never maintaining those gatherings for long. The nails will not allow it. The moment the fighting stops, the moment they are not actively engaged in killing something, the urge to turn on each other becomes overwhelming. They are doomed to isolation, to fighting forever without the comfort of true brotherhood. And so the story ends where it began, with a title and a name that will echo through eternity. Kharn, the betrayer, who burned his brothers from their shelters and shattered his legion on a frozen demon world. Who killed everything within reach and then sought new enemies when his old ones were exhausted. Who serves the blood god with unwavering devotion, not because he chose this service, but because he was remade into a being incapable of choosing anything else. His is a tale of tragedy and horror, of transformation forced upon the unwilling, of the terrible price paid when humanity is sacrificed in pursuit of effectiveness. We tell this story not to glorify the betrayer, but to remember what was lost, to mourn what could have been prevented, and to understand the cost of the galaxy's endless wars. If you found this journey through the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe compelling, if the tragedy of Kharn and his brothers resonated with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more deep dives into the lore of the grim darkness of the far future. We have many more stories to tell, tales of heroes and monsters, of glory and damnation, of the endless war that defines this universe. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of when Kharn became the betrayer, and we will see you in the next story from the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.